Delighted to have you today. We've had over 150 registrations, lots of interest for this topic, and we have speakers from all over, from New Zealand to Italy, to Costa Rica, to California and Mexico, and Canada. So it's really blessed to have everyone here today. My thanks to all our speakers, to our partners, the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and AFAD, who fund this work. And we're lucky to have two speakers from AFAD today. So you're going to see throughout the 90 minutes, we're going to have a mix of videos, PowerPoints, presentations, and there will be a chance for Q&A at the end. For those of you who missed the video, make sure to select your language under the globe in Zoom at the menu on the bar at the bottom. You'll see there's one that says interpretation. And you can, when you want to speak, or we'll let you, we have a team here managing logistics. They can give you permissions in the Q&A to participate. But please use the chat anytime. You're hearing something of interest, you want to react, use the chat. I'm looking forward to an inviting conversation today, engaging, dynamic session. And we'll start off with two sessions of opening remarks, one from Rome, one from IFAD, and the second one from ICA in Costa Rica with our Deputy Director General, Lord Day. So we can go over to IFAD now, Laura. Gloria, please.
On behalf of IFAD, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this seminar on sustainable livestock. This initiative, organised by the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture and financed by the International Fund for Agriculture Development, or IFAD, also has the technical support of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. As you know, climate change will affect animal health, well-being and productivity, with resulting effects especially on pastoralists and small-scale livestock keepers. Changes in climate can lead to new animal pests or to the return of previously eradicated diseases. The secondary impacts of climate change on livestock may include, among others, increased pressure on productive pastures, water resources, and increased fodder prices, ultimately resulting in a loss of food sources, income, and livestock assets. Climate change impacts on poor and disadvantaged rural people disproportionately. Pastoralists, poor households, women, children, youth, and marginalised Indigenous groups being particularly vulnerable. In addition, poverty, lack of political power, and marginalisation from decision-making processes reduce the ability of these groups to adapt to climate change. Climate change is likely to intensify existing inequalities and have different effects on the capacity of women and men to cope with additional stress. In fact, women play a significant and active role in livestock production systems. Climate change necessitates rethinking approaches to gender inequality and to involve both women and men in finding innovative solutions. Between 2003 and 2015, IFAD invested almost $500 million to promote pastoral development. In addition, last year, IFAD launched the Adaptation for Smallholder Agriculture Program, or ASSET Plus, which aims at increasing the resilience of vulnerable communities, farmers, fishers, and pastoralists. For example, in Sudan, livestock business development aims to promote access to finance for livestock owners and market development of the national livestock industry. In Lesotho, wool and mohair production is being improved on the ground with co-benefits for rangeland rehabilitation. In Kyrgyzstan, Asset Plus contributes to enhancing economic growth in pastoral communities through community-driven development approaches. Thank you in advance for your participation today. This is the first in a series of webinars on this important topic. We look forward to the outcomes of today's discussion. Thank you.
My thanks to you, Mr. Hardman. I'd like to then extend a warm welcome to my colleague, Lloyd Day in Costa Rica. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Jason. I'm not sure, if you, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I just had some something come up. Thank you, JC. Hello to everyone, especially to Rory, who is in New Zealand. I know it must be pretty late at night out there, so thank you for being here, as well as to Senor Adrian Vega in Mexico, and to Frank Mittlener, who is going to be speaking later today, who has been a strong colleague of ICA's in many of these types of events. I'm Lloyd Day. I'm the Deputy Director General of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, ICA. ICA represents the Ministers of Agriculture of the Western Hemisphere, from Canada in the north to Chile and Argentina in the south, and 14 member states in the Caribbean as well. Our mission is to promote agricultural development and rural well-being in the Americas and the Caribbean, and to serve as a bridge for the region's contribution to agricultural production and science around the world. Welcome to this webinar series from ICA Canada on sustainable beef. As someone who once used to lead the checkoff programs at the United States Department of Agriculture, the saying, beef, it's what's for dinner, is embedded in my DNA. Working on behalf of agriculture in the Americas, I can tell you that I have not only enjoyed a good steak in Ottawa, our Canadian host city, but also in many of the countries in the cities and countries in the Americas, where the beef sector is not just an important part of each nation's economic activity, but is ingrained in the culture, society, and history of the people. However, the sector is also facing many challenges, with growing concern about climate change and certain methods of production, as well as animal welfare. We must address these concerns to improve not just our methods of production for the sake of the environment and animals, but also show how the sector is vital for its contributions to society. Therefore, we at ICA have been working closely with myriad organizations in the livestock sector to ensure a more balanced and scientific analysis of the importance of livestock. In preparations for the UN Food Systems Summit, ICA partnered with the livestock sector in multiple different fora and publications to provide guidance and leadership from the Americas on the contributions of livestock to human health, nutrition, the economy, and the environment. This culminated with ICA's Director General, Dr. Manuel Otero, presenting 16 key messages from the Americas to the United Nations Food Systems Summit regarding agriculture's important contribution to the transformation of the world's food systems based on farmers, science, and agriculture as part of the solution to our planetary challenges. We are delighted to be partnering in these webinars with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, with whom we formed an alliance last year, and the Canadian Roundtable on Sustainable Beef, our Canadian partner. Thank you to the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, for their sponsorship of these webinars and their decades of collaboration with ICA in the Americas. We are very grateful also for the time and contribution by all of our speakers during these sessions. Your contributions to these discussions will become part of the intellectual record that will help us promote our goal to provide important policies that nations generate to help support sustainable beef production in the Americas, the Caribbean, and other regions of the world. Thank you very much, and best wishes for a very successful webinar.
Excellent opening remarks. My thanks, Lloyd, from Costa Rica. Going to let the audience know now there are two segments before we get to our four panelists. There's probably around 10 minutes. I'd like to invite IFAD to speak to their strategy on rural development, focusing on livestock and climate change. And so we have bios of each of the speakers who will appear in the chat. We've got Antonio Rota, the lead technical specialist in livestock at IFAD next. And I'd like to then invite him and share the mic. Over to you.
Thank you.
Antonio.
Thank you very much. I try to share my presentation here. Voilà. Okay. I hope you can see it. I wish really to thank ICA for the invitation. I hope I will fulfill the theme that I have been assigned. My name is Antonio Rota. I am the lead global technical specialist on livestock development for the International Fund for Agriculture Development. Let me give you a little bit of perspective. Although my colleague Ronald mentioned already some figure, IFAD, since the inception, has invested $1.5 billion in the livestock sector. And at present, you can see from the table that we have about half a billion dollar invested in all region, Asia, Eastern Southern Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, Near Eastern, Northern Africa, Western and Central Africa. How we are going to spend taxpayer money? And in the analysis that we have done, the big chunk of the fund that we make available to country state member through our investment project are going to animal husbandry, to rangeland and pasture rehabilitation. You can see from the screen how the pie is composed. IFAD is a people organization, people-centered organization. And I put at the top here that the livestock sector, and I really hope that we keep that in mind during this series of webinars. Livestock sector is essential for the livelihood of about 1 billion of the world's poorest people. And these are pictures I taken during my supervision mission, implementation support mission, etc. And you can see very well the people we work with. We don't work, and IFAD doesn't invest in commercial, intensive, industrial livestock production, but work with the poorest of the poor, helping them in upgrading the capacity in producing livestock. I've seen in 20 years, but it's 36 years I'm in this business, if you can, in this sector, an evolution in the investment in the livestock sector. While until let's say until the year 2000, most of the projects that we design or the projects that were designed at national level were focusing on increasing production, therefore the typical activity, improving feeding, improving breeding health, helping people to get together, forming association, community development, and for instance, for a long time, early warning systems were the way to cope with the environment. We have seen in the year 2000, a shift of focus, although maintaining the attention on the production, on value chain development. Therefore, paying more attention to processing, value addition, market linkages, access to credit, institutional strengthening, and policy dialogue and engagement. In the last 5 years, I would say, even a little bit more, well, there was a drastic change with a strong focus on increasing resilience and helping the people we have seen before in managing risks. Therefore, we have seen, especially in pastoral area, a number of activity to rehabilitate pasture. One Health became the way we address health, not only looking at animal health, but also human health in the environment. Antimicrobial resistance is now part of the design, and animal welfare is part of the design. We focus more on renewable energy, try to implement activities which preserve biodiversity. Agroecology is becoming very common in project design, climate smart solution, livestock insurance. And IFAD is not a technical institution. We rely on the knowledge of institutions like ICA or FAO, to tell us through their experience, through their knowledge as a center of excellence, how to bring in principle into the design. And FAO estimates that only through improved management practices alone, we could reduce net emission from livestock system by about 30%. Therefore, in our design now, we focus in mainstreaming this principle that I outline here. First of all, increasing the efficiency of livestock production and the use of natural resources. The second is intensify the recycling effort and minimize losses through a circular bioeconomy. Third, capitalize on nature-based solution to build up carbon offsets, and then promoting healthy, sustainable diets and accounting for protein alternative. And very important, developing policy measure to drive these changes. I put here some example. Sorry for a lot of words that I included here, but by applying this principle in Cambodia, we were able to help people in improving poultry production, and those people involved get a net profit of about $650 every 3 months. This is much more of what a woman can make in a garment industry. She doesn't have to move from home, and she can keep those 200 local chicken at home and dedicate time for other activities. Moreover, there are poultry breeding units now with the 500 egg incubator that can allow people to earn $4,300 per year. That means that woman, for instance, in case of men, they do not emigrate anymore to Thailand, and they have money to build houses, invest in education of children, etc. In Tajikistan, through pasture rehabilitation, the institutional development, creating pasture user associations, so managing better the rangeland resource and helping them in access credit, the weight of cattle was significantly higher compared to a control group. This is an analysis that we conducted with a very thorough impact assessment analysis, and it was 30% more the weight of such cattle. And the milk production was skyrocketing, 120%. Of course, we were starting from a low base, but 120%, it's a significant improvement, and more importantly, with 30% less animal. So we were able to increase efficiencies in the production system, producing more with less animal, therefore less pressure on natural resources. In Malawi, where I collaborate with Rory, my colleague that will speak after, we were able, through training, capacity building, again, forming association, grouping people to reduce the mortality of dairy cattle by 95%. Increase, once again, more than doubling the milk production. And I don't want to take too much time. I hope the presentation will be shared. But for instance, look at in Kyrgyzstan, we were able, through the project, to reduce gas emission. This analysis has been done using GLEM-I by FAO colleagues by 11% and 20% as a mean of production, the projection in 2025 and 2030, compared to those areas where we were working without the project, or where the project was not working. Increasing milk production, increasing live weight of animal again. Now, to talk about beef production, in the time allocated, I wanted just to bring to your attention a project that we are implementing with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef in ILRI, International Livestock Research Institute, and NGO Solidaridad in Malawi and Zambia. What we intend to achieve? with an investment of $2 million, we are going to develop technical package and financial package to allow resource poor people to buy leaner animal, therefore increase the offtake from the range of the pasture land, fatten them, using local feed resources during a period of 120 days and resell on the market. This experience built on an experience that we have conducted with the International Livestock Research Institute in Eswatini, the former Swaziland, with a lot of success. And the most important part was not only the technical part, but the fact that a bank, a private bank, decided to make available, to make bankable people who are not bankable to access credit to buy those animals. Therefore, we are going to keep you informed on the development through the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef on this activity. Opla, pardon. Ooh, gosh. Let me see. Okay, I wanted to conclude. Opla. Voila. The conclusion are very straightforward. IFAD believe that investing on livestock is the entry point, an entry point for poverty reduction. And we'll continue to provide support for smallholder farmer adaptation to climate change. And as I said, we really believe that livestock is an entry point for poverty reduction, for improving nutrition and food security, for gender empowerment, and creation of employment opportunity for youth. In order to achieve the above, IFAD will continue engaging through partnership and seeking co-financing opportunity, not only with relevant international institutions or donors, but mostly and more importantly with the private sector, according to a strategy that is now available in IFAD that allow IFAD not only to work with governments, but also with the private sector, which in my opinion is going to play a fundamental role in terms of ensuring sustainability of the investment that IFAD does. So I conclude here. I hope I stay in the time. And once again, thank you for this opportunity. Back to you, Chair, the floor. Over.
C'est gentil, merci Antonio. J'ai beaucoup apprécié et particulièrement les résultats que vous avez démontrés pour l'Afrique, là, et les exemples de l'Asie. Là, c'était très. Il y a eu de l'intérêt, particulièrement pour informer davantage de quelles actions, des bonnes actions qu'on pourrait mettre et investir à petite échelle. Vous avez une question, en fait, je vais le dire en anglais. What is IFAD's position?
Moi, je parlais français ou anglais, espagnol. There is no problem. Okay.
Super, c'est parce que le participant a posé des questions en anglais, je vais transférer. Là.
I see. What is IFAD's position respect to the meat production using culture cell? It's very clear. As you have seen, we work with people who don't have the lucky opportunity that we have in the richest part of the world to choose what to eat every day. They don't have that choose. I think that producing culture cell is an alternative to industrial livestock production, but it's affordable and is available mostly in the richest part of the world. I think the role of an institution like IFAD is to continue working, supporting livestock to make available animal source food, quality animal source food, food safe, secure for people, knowing that by providing such nutrition food, we help children in to grow in a way that our lucky children can grow. We have seen that the dropping from school is reduced. For pregnant women, we reduced drastically the case of anemia, etc., etc. We can talk for, but if it is not against, the problem is that right now, our target or our client, our farmer, don't have this opportunity to access to this kind of food. Over.
Thanks, Antonio. I wish we had more time. I'm going to now invite our four panelists, firstly from New Zealand. And I think this is pretty cool because we just had lunch and Rory's think he'll start breakfast soon. So we're talking to the future. But Rory is the executive director for the Global Roundtable of Sustainable Beef, a new partner, a strong partner of Vika's, and I'll pass you the mic. Over to you, Rory.
Thank you. I'm hopefully sharing my screen.
Yes,
does that look right?
Yep.
Excellent. So thank you very much. As Jean-Charles said, I'm the executive director of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. I've been working for GRSB now for about 12 years. And I really started based in Southern Africa. And at that time, I was working for an NGO on a development program in Southern Africa, moved up to the Netherlands and subsequently moved all the way to New Zealand. But in all of that time, I've been working with the beef industry and with the Global Roundtable. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to work with ICA, who, as you've heard, we have a working relationship with, really forged largely by my colleague, Josefina Eisel, who is our director for Latin America. We also work closely with IFAD, as you heard from Antonio. We have a joint project in Southern Africa. And the Canadian Roundtable is one of the forerunners of the Roundtable network. I'll show you the network. There we are. We have national and regional roundtables all around the world. And the Canadian Roundtable was one of the earliest after the global. And they've really been very proactive in giving demonstrations on what sustainable beef can look like in their country. And it's been a great inspiration to those elsewhere. As you can see throughout the Americas, we've really got excellent representation. Canada, US, Mexico in North America, and then several countries in South America as well. And I should also just say in passing that it's a remarkable feature of this Roundtable network that many of the leaders and movers and shakers, as it were, of the Roundtable network are brilliant women. We have a really excellent network of women involved running these roundtables. And you'll hear from Fawn in Canada after me, but Sam Worth in the United States runs the US Roundtable. As I said, Josefina is our director for Latin America. And there are many more. Monica Haderitz is the executive director in Canada. There are lots of very strong and brilliant women, and we're very grateful to the fact that they want to devote their time to this. Right, I'll move on now and just tell you a little bit about the sort of organizations that we have. We have producers, and that can, that's right from small individual producers on their own ranches right up to large companies managing millions of hectares, and even larger than that, we have the producer organizations, people like the Canadian Cattlemen's Association in Canada, Meat and Livestock in Australia, Cattle Council of Australia. So those are representative organizations which have tens or even hundreds of thousands of producers involved. We have the processors, so the big companies who are involved in the processing of beef in slaughterhouses and packing houses. And those are very large companies. As you'll have heard, the concentration in that sector is pretty extreme. And the largest of them are also involved with GRSB. We have a lot of input suppliers into the beef industry, whether that's financial services, pharmaceutical companies, and other inputs like feed. And we have offtake organizations like the leather industry also involved. We have civil society. We involve NGOs and academic organizations in GRSB, and they bring a lot of the concerns for natural resources, for social equality, and all of those kind of things. And you see the name there, Savory Institute. They're very focused particularly on regenerative agriculture and making good use of livestock to regenerate and restore rangelands. We also have some retailers involved. So we have restaurant chains and supermarket retailers. We have the national roundtables, as I said, around the world. You saw the map of them already. And the number of them is growing pretty much yearly. You will have seen that China was a slightly different color. We have a sort of emergent organization in China, but it's been very difficult for us to get to China over the past couple of years, as you can imagine. So we hope to pick that up again soon and drive sustainability, not just in terms of production within China, but also in terms of their demand for imported meat from elsewhere. And then we have a number of consulting members, which includes NGOs, it includes government or parastatal organization, it includes the FAOs, LEAP, and ICA itself. These are organizations which don't otherwise fit into one of our regular constituencies. And then we've got a few observing organizations. So really what we are here to do is to emphasize the fact that beef can be a trusted part of a thriving food system, that beef can be sustainable, and that beef is an important part of our food system. We hear, of course, a lot of people who feel otherwise about beef, that it causes a lot of problems. And of course, it has done that. In the past, there are still significant challenges to be met. But we know there are solutions, and working with our worldwide network, we can bring those solutions and we can spread them around to make sure that everything that we're doing is really delivering a sustainable product that people can feel happy about eating. We based our roundtable and all of the work we do on these core principles. We work on natural resources, which you can imagine has quite a number of criteria underneath it, but it's about managing soils well. It's about managing grasslands well. It's about making sure that water impacts are minimized or in fact even improved, because we can, through good management of soil and grasslands, we can actually improve water infiltration and soil moisture retention. We work on people in the community. That's really the avenue that we're using with that IFAD project in Southern Africa, inclusive red meat value chains for women and youth, where we're actually trying to improve the livelihoods of people in some of those poorer countries. And everywhere in the world, we need to make sure that this is an economically viable activity. You may have heard the phrase, it may sound trite as well, you can't be green if you're in the red, but it's an important consideration for producers. For producers to be truly sustainable, they have to be making a profit. They have to have a real livelihood coming out of it. Animal health and welfare is obviously a really important one as well, and I'll come back to our goal on that in a minute. Food is a principle which is really based on food safety and transparency along the supply chain. So we want to know where our food comes from, and we want to know that the source was sustainable. And then efficiency innovation is there as a recognition that there are new technologies, there are things that we can do to evolve and to take ourselves to a new level. And we shouldn't shun those technologies. We should recognize that some technologies are going to be beneficial. That doesn't mean the blanket acceptance of all of them, but if we come across a technology which we can see is going to add to sustainability, we should embrace it. So I wanted to talk about our global goals. We released these global goals last year. The first of them is on animal health and welfare. And the idea is that by 2030, we will be providing cattle with an environment in which they can thrive through best practices. And what are those best practices? We talk about the adoption of pain mitigation. It's a very important factor in animal welfare, but it also delivers significant benefits to producers through improved production, lower stress in the animals so they actually thrive better. We also want to ensure that all of our people who are handling cattle are properly trained and experienced in what they're doing. Now, of course, many producers are, but new entrants coming into the industry need to be given the opportunity to be trained and understand how to work with animals. Climate is a really important one. You will have heard often that cattle emit methane. They do, they belch methane, and it's a powerful greenhouse gas. Our goal is that by 2030, we will reduce the net global climate impact of beef by 30%. And you've heard already from IFAD how that's possible. There are new technologies that will also help us on the way. This is an ambitious target. This is not going to be easy because some countries are already doing quite well. Their emissions per head and per kilogram are already low. For them to improve is a step up because it means embracing new technologies. But for many other countries in the global south, there are big challenges to adopting any kind of technology, and we need to make sure that that becomes available and that the training to go with it also becomes available. And the final of our three goals is on nature positive production. We want, again, by 2030, the global beef value chain to be a net positive contributor to nature. And you'll have heard again many times that beef in some parts of the world has negative impacts, especially through deforestation. But what you hear far less frequently is the essential role of grazing ruminants in sustaining grasslands. And so we want to make sure that that role is accentuated, that beef and cattle are playing their positive role in making sure that nutrients are being cycled in grasslands, that we're getting food from grasslands, and that they're contributing to soil health and ecosystem health. And of course, at the same time, make sure that we're not causing destruction of other ecosystems like forests, etc. There are a few things coming up that it might be interesting for you to know about. We just launched our beef carbon footprint guideline. This is based on the work of FAO LEAP. They provided the sort of baseline, if you like, of how to do these things. We have made a specific beef carbon footprint guideline, which is available on our website. We are having a innovation tour looking at sustainable production in the Gran Chaco coming up at the end of May. Please, if you're in that region and you have an interest in this, go to our website and look for the links to sign up for that. It promises to be really interesting. And then in November of this year, we're going to have our global conference on sustainable beef. That's going to be in Denver, Colorado. And I hope, again, many of you will be able to join us for that. So thank you very much for having me. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. If you're interested in learning more about sustainable beef in general, do visit us, visit our website, follow us on the social media, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, Jean-Charles.
Oh, thank you. On the contrary, very interesting, and it's good for the audience to better grasp who you are and the significant role that you play. I'm going to, before we get to the questions, there are two now in the chat, but you can have a look at them, Rory, and think about it. I'm going to invite one of those brilliant women that you were referring to, Rory, and a Canadian colleague of mine, Fawn Jackson. Over to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I didn't pay Rory to say that. I have to start with. But it's so wonderful to be here and back talking about sustainability and beef production. I did have a chance previously in my career. I got to be the founding executive director of the Canadian Roundtable for sustainable beef. And I can tell you those were some really cherished years of getting to work with everybody on this really important work. And now I'm the director of policy and international affairs with the Canadian Cattlemen's Association here in our nation's capital in Ottawa. And so we represent 60,000 beef producers across Canada who steward 44 million acres of grasslands and pasture lands across all 10 provinces across our very large nation. And, I would just give a little bit more context. The beef industry in Canada is depends on the year, either our largest or our second largest agriculture industry here. And employs around 328,000 Canadians. So quite a significant portion of Canada's agriculture story. And certainly we're very proud of the progress that we have made on sustainability here. But if I only told you those portions of our beef industry, I don't think that I would be giving a full, fair representation of the fact that we also have challenges here. And I would say quite significant challenges. So for example, starting in the early 2000s, when we unfortunately, of course, had BSE, we saw a really large exit from the beef industry. So we saw around 25,000 producers leave. With them went 5 million acres of grasslands. And really has contributed to some of our challenges, for example, on the biodiversity side, where we've seen 57% of grassland birds disappear between 1970s and about now. So this sustainability conversation is one that in Canada, it just kept on growing and growing, and sustainability of the economics of the beef industry, sustainability on the environment side. And at that point, I was the environment manager at the CCA, and the sustainability papers just kept on piling up to a point where we thought we really need to tackle this in a different manner. And so we looked at the global roundtable that we had been a part of and said, well, can we start this in Canada? And the answer to that was yes. And from our producer community, but also from, Rory mentioned those different stakeholder category groups. And so we went around and had conversations with a number of them and thought, yes, this is something that we need to do in Canada, both to be able to have more effective conversations with our consumers, but also to really address some of these very significant sustainability challenges that we were having and that we continue to have. And I think it might seem a little bit obtuse to some folks who only get to read Twitter headlines, but we really have a lot in common, particularly with our environmental community here. And what we've seen since the inception of the CRSB is, I would say, that those partnerships have grown and have really come to deliver some really amazing outcomes here. And so what I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about in my session today is about some of those partnerships, what they look like today, and what we're accomplishing. So first of all, I would start with the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and they have 3 areas of expertise that they work on. So a national beef sustainability assessment was the first thing we did. We had to figure out, well, where are we on all of these different 5 principles of sustainable beef so that we can decide where we want to go. They also have sustainability certification program, and this has been really key to the conversation here. And I can tell you that when we started on the certified sustainable beef conversation, our reaction as beef producers at the start was, no, thank you. We have enough red tape. We have enough audits. We have enough of all of these things. And we're not sure how this is really going to serve our beef producers and some of the outcomes that we're looking at. We had conversations back and forth, particularly with McDonald's, who was very interested in this. And we landed on, well, let's do a pilot to see how this could work. So we started out back, I think 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And that pilot resulted in 1.5 8 million pounds of beef going through a certified sustainable beef program to today, where 17% of Canadian beef production is actually going through this certified beef program now. So, pretty exciting. And I think that it was a really healthy dialogue of getting a program that was going to be meaningful both to producers as well as to the supply chain. So that's one piece and we really use it to help drive extension out into producers. As I mentioned before, Canada is very large. Extension can be difficult. So how can we use these programs not only to communicate along the supply chain, but to drive research outcomes, these sorts of things. So, really proud of the CRSB and their other core area of work, which I'm going to get into a little bit more detail now, is sustainability projects. And so it's not that the CRSB does all of those projects, but that the membership of the CRSB is doing projects that align with the goals that we would like to accomplish. And some of this work is really it's really amazing. And I just want to give an example of one in particular. It was done by Multisar and a program called Cows and Fish. And essentially, the idea is that farmers and ranchers have a lot to do already, right? I mean, you have to take care of your cattle, you have to know your markets, you have to know, feed and all of these different pieces. So then knowing a whole bunch about the different species at risk that are on your operation, or having, time and capacity to perhaps put in wildlife-friendly fencing, or how to manage for different riparian areas. You have to have a lot of expertise, you have to have time, you have to have money. And so what we did was we went to the Canadian government and we said, we need help with species at risk, because the people who are ending up with species at risk on their operations are farmers and ranchers who have grasslands, and we're putting a lot of pressure on them with no support to be able to manage for these species. And if they get it wrong, they get in trouble, because of course we have laws and regulations that protect our species at risk here in Canada. So what happened was there was a fund set up called the Species at Risk on Agricultural Landscapes Fund, and Multisar and Cows and Fish were able to work with ranchers who invited them onto their property, and they brought the biologists and the grazing specialists and some funding to be able to do these different activities. And these management practices were delivered on just under 300,000 acres across Canada. So when we get these different stakeholders together, we're able to see, really, I would say, partnership that enables doing of environmental work. I think lots of us can talk about it, but we need those boots on the ground, the people who are going to do it, and the capacity for them to be able to do it. So that's, an example of that program. But I also wanted to talk about some other, I would say, strengthened partnerships that have come out of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And in Western Canada, of course, as much of North America struggles with wildfires. And what we have, the Beef Cattle Association of British Columbia has worked with their municipalities, with their governments, with their fire departments on how can we use grazing animals to reduce the fire load that is under the trees in those parts of the world. And we've been trying to use radio collars so that we can move the cattle around. And this has been done really successfully at quite a small scale. And we're looking at how can we expand this, particularly during the fires of 2017. We can really attribute the saving of a couple of communities to the fact that there was grazing animals that were used to control the amount of understory that was there. Another example that I would like to talk about is on the broader policy conversation. So here in Canada, we have a next policy framework that is going to be starting in 2023. And as I mentioned or alluded to earlier, agriculture is a very complex ecosystem, of course. And, we can have one policy that we think is going to drive one thing, but actually in reality, it might drive another. And for us, of course, we're very often worried about policies that might drive grassland conversion. And so we have been working with Ducks Unlimited Canada, with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, on trying to understand how all of these different environment policies or risk management programs or these types of things are interacting at a level so that we can see their impact on the broader agricultural landscape. And so we have put in a submission jointly with those organizations on this next policy framework, saying, indicating that we really need, further information on grasslands and wetlands to be able to make sure that these policies are having the outcomes that we would like, that we want to see more ecosystem service programs in Canada. So, I guess I just focus on a couple of different examples because lots of times when we're talking about, the principal level and getting all of these folks around the table, well, what are the on the ground or the policy level outcomes that we're really looking for? And, I'm very excited for this future because I would say here in Canada, there hasn't been this level of understanding of the benefit that when invested in appropriately, the solutions that agriculture, across all of agriculture, can bring, especially for climate change and these nature-based solutions. There was a study done by Nature United, and I encourage everybody to go in and look at it. It really emphasizes that if we invested appropriately in nature-based solutions, we could see an 11% reduction in Canada's greenhouse gas footprint. And in that report, it also identifies that the number one nature-based solution that we could really invest in is the avoided conversion of grasslands, because we do continue to see these grasslands in Canada continue to disappear. But nonetheless, just yesterday, actually, the Canadian government made a significant investment in our emissions reduction plan and really recognized agriculture, and I would say specifically the beef industry, for the important role. And there were significant investments that did go along with that. So I'm really excited about the future of our industry, and I'm excited about the collaborations that have come out of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And I think that we're just going to see those continue to grow. So perhaps with that, I would hand it back over, and thank you so much for the opportunity today.
Oh, it's very enjoyable listening to you, and it's been a pleasure to understand the Canadian perspective and the realities here, and with examples on the ground, and the focus on farming forward. I like, the foresight, the future elements. People are always looking towards how we can improve, and I think you've inspired many of the listeners in the Zoom and on Facebook that are participating today. Maybe you could add the link to your report that you mentioned in the chat.
Sure.
And I want to remind the listeners that all the themes that Vaughn has been talking about or referencing in her work is part of the series. A reminder, this is the first of 5 webinars. So it's a series of 5. We're going to have another one in April, 2 in May, and another one in June. And we're going to be looking at different ways of tackling this issue. So one webinar will look at how cattle and beef can provide climate change solutions. The other one will look at how livestock preserves high-value food systems, and that's where you can talk to land conversion or grassland value, for instance. We'll talk about sustainability economics of beef production in the long term in the Americas. And then in the last session, we'll be looking more at how sustainable beef strategies promote development outcomes and promote value chain sustainability too. So really excited that we have all these themes covered over the coming weeks. I'm really happy to see the exchanges in the chat. And so I think what we'll do is we'll remove the Q&A session at the end to give more time to the panelists and the speakers to participate in the chat. And then I'm going to invite now, I think what we'll do is we have a video. The Dr. Midloner was available, but now is traveling to South America. So prepared a video. We'd asked him to look at the global methane picture and to maybe give an example, sort of like what Fawn was just doing for Canada. He will give an example of dairy in California. So we can, Isabel, if you can put the video on, please. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Frank Midloner, and I'm here in the Department of Animal Science at UC Davis, and I want to talk about livestock and climate to you today. If you are on social media, I'm as well on Twitter, GHG Guru. Come and join me. This slide here shows what's called the global warming potential of various greenhouse gases. GWP 100 is the abbreviation, and it shows how methane and nitrous oxide compare with respect to the potency to trap heat versus CO2. And so if, let's say, a source produces 10 tons of methane, all you need to do is multiply the 10 tons of methane that this source emits times this GWP 100 factor of 28. So 10 times 28 is 280 tons of CO2 equivalent, or CO2e. That's how that works. The problem is that this matrix, that's what it's called, GWP 100, which by the way was first invented in 1990, so 30 years ago, leaves out some very important nuances around methane. And I want to really bring some clarity to that. What you see on this slide is the global methane budget. You see here that on the left side of the slide are numerous sources of methane, including fossil fuel use, agriculture and waste, biomass burning, wetlands and others. And as you can see, when you look at this left half bubble on the left, you see that these sources amount to a total of approximately 560 teragrams of methane that are emitted globally. So 560 teragrams are emitted. But if you look closely on the right side of the slide, you see that there are also significant sinks. And these sinks amount to a total of 550 teragrams. 560 are produced, but 550 are destroyed. And that means the balance between the two is 10. Still a number that we seek to further reduce, but certainly one that's very different from just looking at the emissions alone. So when we hear about this sink or the destruction of methane, what is it? What takes place there? Well, what takes place is a so-called atmospheric removal process. There are molecules in the air that sooner or later get in contact with methane, and these molecules are called radicals. To be precise, they're called hydroxyl radicals. And when these hydroxyl radicals meet a methane molecule, they destroy it, and that happens within 10 years. Approximately 10 years. And that means that methane is not just produced but also destroyed, and destroyed atmospherically by these radicals. This process is not really considered when doing the calculations with this GWP 100 unit that I talked about on my previous slide. And I call methane the fast and furious. Furious because it has a good punch to it, but fast because it's short-lived. I will now walk you through where the carbon in the methane, the CH4 carbon, where that carbon comes from, where it originates. It all starts with photosynthesis, or the process by which plants take carbon out of the air, and then they take that carbon in the form of CO2 from the atmosphere and make it into carbohydrates. Carbohydrates such as cellulose or starch. Those carbohydrates are then ingested by a bovine, a cow, let's say, and in the rumen, methanogens, methane-forming microbes do their little work and produce this gas, methane, CH4. But is the carbon in this methane, in the CH4, is that carbon new and additional to our atmosphere? And the answer to that question is no. It's recycled carbon. It was in the atmosphere before in the form of CO2. So the so-called biogenic carbon cycle around cattle is very different from other sources of greenhouse gases, such as the fossil fuel sector. So first of all, what are fossil fuels? Fossil fuels are oil, coal, gas, and they originally were plant material or animal material that populated our planet a long time ago, hundreds of millions of years ago. All that biomass that lived on Earth before then died, decayed, fossilized, accumulated underground, and over the last 70 years, 70 that is, humans extracted approximately half of all that carbon, half of that ancient carbon. We took it out of the ground, we brought it to the surface, we burned it with cars, trucks, trains, planes, ships, and now that carbon is in the atmosphere. So colleagues of mine from Oxford University in the UK years ago decided that they needed to blow the whistle because the way that we quantify methane does not really take into consideration the fact that methane is a short-lived climate pollutant, that methane is not just produced but also destroyed. They said the old unit GWP 100 critically mischaracterizes the impact of that gas on warming, and they proposed a new unit, a new matrix called GWP star. This new unit that Oxford came up with, GWP star, is actually a unit or a matrix that takes the short-lived nature of methane into consideration, and it actually looks at the atmospheric removal of methane. And that's very important. I just told you that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, acknowledged that the old unit GWP 100 mischaracterizes the impact of constant sources on methane. And if you want to read that up, please go to the IPCC AR6 report. In chapter 7, you will find on page 123 this excerpt that I put out here, which says that there's a drastic overestimation from constant sources that is the result of using this old unit GWP 100. I will show you in the next couple of slides why that really matters, okay? Because the world has been characterizing the impact of livestock methane on climate in a way that is significantly flawed and that needs to be rectified. In order to understand that, you need to understand the difference between various greenhouse gases, one being CO2, the other one being methane. I'll start with CO2. Let's imagine that you work 20 kilometers from home and that you have to drive to work. On Monday, you drive, let's say that's day one, and when you burn gas, then you put CO2 into the air. On Tuesday, you drive the same distance and you put new additional carbon into the air, which is now in addition to what you put out the previous day and to what you put into the air last week, last month, last year, last decade, to what your parents and grandparents put into the air. CO2 is a stock gas. Every time we burn fossil fuel, we add new and additional carbon to the existing stock. It is less potent than methane, but it stays in the atmosphere pretty much forever. Currently, methane is treated by most public policymakers as if it were to behave the same way as CO2. As if methane, every time it's belched out or produced from animal manure, as if every time that were to happen, we were to add new and additional methane to the atmosphere. It leaves out the fact that there's an atmospheric removal of methane. If, let's say, you have a constant source of methane, let's say a constant dairy herd or a constant beef herd, then the amount of methane produced and the amount of methane destroyed over, let's say, 20 years are roughly in balance. That makes methane a flow gas. Okay? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying methane doesn't matter. Methane does matter. I told you it's the fast and furious. But if we have constant sources of methane, then these constant sources do not add additional carbon to the atmosphere and hence not additional warming to our climate. And if we reduce methane, if we manage to mitigate it, then we can pull carbon out of the air. And that is a real opportunity to us. I will now show you how the old unit GWP100 versus the new GWP star compare. And I do so by showing you three scenarios. The first one is one where over 30 years we increase the amount of methane by 35%. The second scenario is one where methane is kept pretty stable. Maybe we slightly reduce it by 10%. And the third scenario is one where we reduce methane by a lot, 35%. How would the old unit GWP100 characterize these three scenarios? It would predict that in all three cases we were to add a lot of additional CO2 equivalent emissions to our atmosphere. And that we know cannot be true, because if we have constant or decreasing sources of methane, then there can't be additional CO2 equivalent emissions. So let's see what this new unit from Oxford, GWP star, predicts for the three same scenarios. GWP star predicts that if you increase methane by a lot, you add a lot of additional warming. And that's what you see here as being blue north of the x-axis. In fact, when we increase methane, then GWP star and GWP100 align. We do not want to add increasing amounts of methane to our atmosphere. But look what happens in the second scenario. If we hold our methane stable or slightly reduce it, then you will not see any blue north of the x-axis, and that means no additional warming. In fact, because this scenario says reduce by 10% over 30 years, which is a slight reduction, we see a little bit of blue south of the x-axis, and that means there's now a little bit of negative warming. But look what happens in the third scenario. If we reduce methane by a lot over 30 years, by 35%, then we are pulling a lot of carbon from the air. And that means we are now generating significant cooling. Now, that's a real opportunity. So the question then will be, can such a strong reduction of methane be achieved? The answer is absolutely yes. Here in California, we have probably the most aggressive regulation on methane anywhere in the world. Our farmers are mandated to reduce methane by 40%, 40. And that reduction has to happen by the year 2030, below 2013 thresholds. The legislature decided to not use the cane approach of rules and regulations and fines to make farmers reduce methane, but to use the carrot approach of using financial incentives to help farmers reduce methane. And that helped. Over the last few years, many of our farmers, dairy farmers, and we talk about large dairies, decided to cap their lagoons, to cover their lagoons and trap the biogas that's formed underneath. This technology in general is called anaerobic digestion, okay? And this is how it looks like when it's applied here in California. So they take what's called a lagoon where the manure is stored, they cover it, and they trap the biogas, 60% of which is methane. And instead of that biogas going into the air, they are now capping it, capturing it, and converting it into a fuel type called renewable natural gas. And this fuel type is then used to fuel vehicle fleets. So up until now, we are reducing about 2 million metric tons of greenhouse gases from manure management here in California. That amounts to almost a 30% reduction of methane from our dairy sector. And that's pretty revolutionary, and that's incredible. I've never thought it would be possible that in just a few years, a sector as large as our dairy sector can reduce 30% of its manure-based methane. And this is what it looks like. You take the RNG from the dairy, the renewable natural gas that came from animal biogas, and you then run it into vehicles such as semi-trucks or buses or other vehicle types. And that conversion of biogas to renewable natural gas is considered the most carbon negative fuel type there is. As a result, it's strongly financially incentivized by the state with a special kind of carbon credit. It's called low carbon fuel standard credit, and that makes it financially very worthwhile to producers. If you want to have a little bit more information The CLEAR Center that I'm directing has put out several documents. One of them is a white paper. You see it here on the left. It's showing how US beef and dairy can reach climate neutrality. Please don't be mistaken. This is not just something that applies to the United States. It can apply to any part of the world. It contains not just the recipe as to how you can calculate and what it means to achieve reductions with respect to climate, but also it contains Excel spreadsheets that help you do calculations for wherever you are in the world. So that's the left one, the white paper. The right one here is a YouTube video our center has put together called Rethinking Methane. It summarizes in 5 minutes what we have learned over the last few years about methane and why that really matters to you. I strongly recommend that you download and watch and share that important YouTube video. So with that, I just want to point out that the CLEAR Center, we write a blog, and you might find many articles on that site under this address here. And of course, please visit us on our webpage, the CLEAR Center webpage, clear.ucdavis.edu. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you learned something new. Thank you very much.
Well, our thanks to Dr. Medloner. I think that when we had a chat and we were able to discuss the topics with him, you can tell the importance of understanding the differences in evolution in our thinking and understanding of GWP 100 to GWT star, the difference between carbon and methane, and the examples from California, very inspirational. I hope you learned something from that presentation. I want to invite the panelists to look at the chat to respond to the different questions. We've had some on Facebook. We've been transferring in here to Zoom. We have one on Kuzma for fun. And so I'll ask the team to post the link to the white paper in the chat. And we have our final panelist for today from Mexico. He's Adrian Vega, Deputy Director for Livestock at the Department of Agriculture. Over to you, Adrian, por favor. We can't hear you yet. Gloria, did we want to adjust the sound?
Bueno, no se escucha nada.
Sí, we can hear you now.
Ah, sí, gracias.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
¿Pueden hacerme el favor de subir mi presentación, por favor?
Would you put my presentation up on the screen? Okay, I see it's coming. Hello, good afternoon. I would like to thank Jean-Charles, representative of Vega in Canada, for having invited me to participate in such an important event. The title of my presentation is Sustainable Livestock in Mexico. Next slide, please. The contents of my presentation is divided in 7 sections, as we can see on the screen, but for time reasons, I will not read this slide. Next, please. Mexico is a livestock country. Livestock takes place in 7.8 million hectares, 56% of the country's surface. We have more than 1.3 million cattle production units, and there are 37.3 million heads of animals, 91.6% of which are cattle. Next, please. In the international context, Mexico occupies 10th position in the production of animal production protein and 6th in the production of beef and chicken meat. For 2020, the projection was 40 billion US dollars in production. The sector contributed with 4.03% of the country's GDP in 2021, and cattle raising represented 28.27%. Next, please. Cattle raising has been a challenge and hazardous to the environment without valuing the environmental benefits, economic and social benefits this activity brings about. Also, in 2019, livestock produced 98 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. That represents 13.2 of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the country, of which 94.6% correspond to methane and 5.6% to nitrous oxide because of the inadequate treatment of manure. Basically, there is a poor land and cattle management and has led to the loss of 47% of the native pasture lands, degradation of 61% of the soils due to erosion, and also the degradation of 58% of the vegetation also. This activity is considered responsible for the deforestation of 157,728 hectares of forests and jungles a year. Livestock is one of the most important activities, but that causes biggest effects on the loss of biodiversity and has led to the loss of food products, erosion of agricultural production. And we need to go from a conventional livestock or cattle raising to one that is environment friendly. Next one, please. Cattle raising promotes rural development, sustainable rural development due to the production of food products and the generation of income and employment, and can also be an ally in fighting climate change, desertification, and preservation of biodiversity. Cattle raising is very important to maintain productivity and biodiversity. 60% of the land is for this type of use. And basically we see cattle growing or being raised in areas that used to be full of animals. Now they are very few. We see them also generating ecosystem benefits, and this has not been measured appropriately in Mexico. All these co-benefits could be further enabled using sustainable practices and thus contribute to the sustainable development goals, particularly goals 1, 2, 8, 12, 13, and 15. Next slide, please. Next, please. Okay, to continue in the order of the presentation, I will talk about challenges and opportunities to go from conventional cattle raising to a more sustainable production. Excuse me, let us go back. Let us go back one, excuse me. Slide 4. The overall challenge is to increase production of food products of animal origin with the least environmental impact under uncertain climate change scenarios of economic and sanitary nature. The main challenges are, well, diverse. Here we must highlight the high vulnerability to climate change and the existence of very contrasting production systems, technological delays, the lack of economic integration and organization at all scales, the lack of funding and marketing and production, sanitary issues, and the insufficient interinstitutional coordination. All of these barriers we must correct to move towards sustainability. However, at the same time, there are major opportunities for the development of sustainable beef, as is the growing demand for food products of animal origin, greater awareness among the population regarding the consumption of food and as a safe and healthy food. And there's also a big market potential for sustainable production. Cattle raisers and other key actors are interested in Mexico in moving towards sustainability. There is an existence also of international cooperation. This is fundamental, an opportunity we cannot let go by. On the other hand, we must consider there is also big potential of 53% of the country to generate produce diverse environmental co-benefits. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. Now let us talk about the sustainable cattle herd. In general coordination, at SADER and other members have created promoting this system as an instrument, a public policy instrument to foster the development of sustainable agriculture in the country and cattle raising in the country. Funding is being sought for its implementation. The objective of this is to increase the productivity of the beef sector and with low greenhouse gas effects and the preservation of the natural heritage of Mexico. If we do not foster productivity and sustainability of this sector, we will very unlikely move towards sustainability. This MEA was developed to avoid heating of 1.5 degrees C additionally. And this contributes to the sustainable development goals and the country's own goals. As to greenhouse gas reduction and adaptation to climate change and conservation of biodiversity. Well, all of this will be done through the technological adoption of sustainable practices, nature-based, obviously, many of which can generate co-benefits. We foster 9 groups of technologies. And the MEA focuses on value chains and cattle or bovine dairy. Excuse me, the previous slide, please. This will be done in 2 phases over 75 months and throughout the different country, talking about 115,000 heads of cattle in 10 federative units that represent the main regions of the country. The area of impact is about 685,000 hectares, and the potential mitigation is 2,493,692 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. To address the barriers to sustainable livestock and cattle raising, the following components will be applied: strengthen and articulate institutions, knowledge management, funding. We seek to generate a branch. Mexico sustainable beef, etc. Thank you. Next slide, please.
La mesa redonda de ganadería sustentable. La siguiente, por favor.
Next, please.
Una anterior, por favor. No.
One less. Back one.
La mesa
Okay.
Eh,
The Mexico, one slide back, please. The Sustainable Beef Roundtable in Mexico, a civil organization, was created in 2021 and as a national chapter of the Global Beef Roundtable. The National Federation of Cattle Raisers heads this initiative with the participation of different players in civil society. Its vision is to contribute to the sustainability of all the value chain in Mexico, considering social, environmental aspects, economic aspects, through the cooperation of all members. This initiative, headed by cattle raisers in Mexico, aims at sustainability in all links of the beef value chain and will play a decisive role to consolidate sustainable agriculture and livestock in the country. The Roundtable Sustainable Beef Association basically will be participating very actively in all activities. Next, please. Now, lastly, allow me to speak to other actions underway in Mexico. I will mention these in very general terms. Many of these are tools and others are projects. As two tools, we have the vulnerability maps and these are available in the National Atlas that can be found on the website. You can see on the bottom left here on the screen. Next, please. Other efforts are the climate change agenda and agri-food production agenda, fostered by ICA Mexico in coordination with GTZ. It was developed with the participation of several institutions and key actors, and it considers lines and strategic actions for Semarnat and outcome indicators. Another project implemented in tropical areas is the Biopasos. This is biodiversity and the sustainable agro-silvopastoral landscapes. Next, please. Another project that we are implementing in coordination with producers is the potential sequestration of carbon in soils using sustainable production practices in semi-arid areas in the northeastern region. This will provide a lot of information because for the time being, we do not have information as to the potential carbon sequestration in those lands. The Ministry of Agriculture and the Secretariat of Agriculture and Development has worked on the integration of biodiversity in agriculture and rural landscapes throughout Mexico. All these projects are being implemented through these through international support. Next, please. Next.
Un anterior, por favor.
One back, please.
Un anterior, por favor.
One back.
El INEC, el Instituto Nacional de Ecología y Cambio Climático, está liderando.
The National Institute on Climate Change is heading a project. Now one more, please. Okay, now we go. Next, please. The National Ecology Institute is driving the project connecting the health of water basins with agroforestry and cattle raising efforts. This is in 28 water basins, and the main objective is to improve connectivity. This is work underway at the Secretariat of Agriculture and Rural Development, and there's an inventory of land for agricultural use, and it will help make decisions in favor of sustainable development of the environment. And we are developing a catalog related to this. Thank you very much for your attention, and I apologize for the poor audio. Thank you. Now, just the opposite. Thank you very much, Mr. Vega. I love the part on the data from Mexico, the different actions, and this gives us a Mexican overview. Many of us do not know about that, so it was very timely. So it was very good to share these actions with the audience. So congratulations, and I wish you great success.
Oh, it's a pleasure. On the contrary, thanks for participating. I wanted to allow for one more question in the chat. We were just on time. We're just a couple minutes over. So while I'm waiting to see if there are any additional questions, I did want to thank all of our speakers. Really fascinating, fun. It's been a joy listening to all of you from all these different angles, different perspectives, because it's a large subject matter, difficult to attack from. But you've did it, and so it's been beneficial for, I think, for our audience to listen to these leaders, thought leaders. Each of you have contributed in your own way, and it's made for a productive session. I've learned a lot, and I hope that the public has. So our thanks to our interpreters, our thanks to our team here running the logistics, and both here in Ottawa and in Costa Rica, to our panelists, to our speakers, and to our partners, especially IFAD, who's funded the work, and Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. It's not over. This is the first of 5 sessions. We're looking at April 21st as the next date, same time, Ottawa time, 1 o'clock, for the next session. And so we'll get the word out. We'll ask you to promote it, and we're still finalizing the agenda and confirming speakers. So I don't see any additional questions, but I've really been thankful to you for responding to all those questions. It's allowed us to save some time and give each of you more time to speak. So it's been a joy. Any last words to any of the 3 speakers we have on screen? Else we're happy to close shop. Fawn is like, no. All good. All right, excellent. Wait, one more message. Thank you. Oh yeah, Juan, no problem. So please stay safe, everyone. We'll see you in a month's time. And bon appetit. Cheers.